Don't miss a second. The explosive full story of Dr. Maya Washington starts right now. Night after tireless night, fueled by passion and genius.
Maya makes an earth-shattering breakthrough. Amani 7, a potential cure for a devastating disease.
Breakthrough. Amani 7, a potential cure for a devastating disease.
Her genius dismissed as mere technical assistance. Maya watches in horror as her life's work is paraded as their own. Pushed to the brink, isolated, betrayed. Every door seems slammed shut. But Maya holds on to her truth, her meticulously kept records.
Suddenly, an international stage, Geneva.
H-Ebro Alpha. Her stolen discovery about to be unveiled to the world by those who took it. But a surprise awaits them.
Will the truth finally have its moment?
Esteemed colleagues,
This is the gripping true story of Dr. Maya Washington and her fight for Amani 7. Stay with us to uncover how justice was served.
The biting November wind, a raw, unwelcome harbinger of winter, howled around the steel and glass canyons of New York City. It was a symphony of urban hustle, yellow cabs blurring past, steam billowing from grates, the distant wail of a siren. But deep within the imposing, almost Gothic structure of the Hudson Institute for Biomedical Research, nestled unassumingly on the Upper East Side, the chill Dr. Maya Washington felt was far more personal, more insidious. It was the familiar, gnawing cold of being a ghost in her own professional life, her intellect and passion often eclipsed by the shadow of her skin, a constant, unspoken asterisk next to her name. Maya's journey into the intricate dance of molecules and cells hadn't started in the sterile, ozone-scented corridors of the Hudson. It began in a sun-drenched, slightly cluttered apartment in Queens, where the aroma of her grandmother's collard greens mingled with the faint metallic scent of her first, most prized possession, a bright blue, plastic-bodied microscope. A ninth birthday gift. While other kids were mastering video games or obsessing over pop stars, Maya was lost in a universe invisible to the naked eye. She'd spend hours meticulously preparing slides. A strand of her own hair, a flake of her skin, the iridescent wing of a fallen moth. She remembered the sheer, unadulterated thrill of her 7th grade science fair. Her project, on the antimicrobial properties of local honey, was initially met with polite skepticism by a judge who'd spent more time complimenting her neat handwriting than her methodology. But when her carefully cultured petri dishes showed undeniable zones of inhibition around the honey samples, outperforming some commercial antiseptics, the skepticism had turned to stunned silence, then reluctant admiration. She'd won first prize, a small victory that fanned the flames of her ambition. Her grandmother, a woman whose wisdom was as deep as her love, had framed the blue ribbon. "See, child," she'd said, her eyes twinkling. "They can try to look past you, but they can't ignore the truth when it's staring them in the face." That truth, Maya's undeniable brilliance, had propelled her through the grueling demands of academia, scholarships won, honors earned, culminating in a PhD in molecular biology from Stanford. Now, at 29, she was a junior research fellow at the Hudson, a prestigious institution with a reputation as formidable as its donor list. She was assigned to the Neurodegenerative Diseases Unit, a veritable graveyard of scientific hypotheses. Her specific challenge, rapid onset neurocognitive decline, or ROND, a cruel, fictional disease that struck with terrifying swiftness, primarily in adults under 40, unraveling minds and identities, leaving families devastated. The Institute had poured a king's ransom into ROND research for over a decade, with little more than incremental, often insignificant findings to show for it. It was the kind of high-stakes, low-yield project often handed to the newest, most expendable members of the team. Her immediate superior, Dr. Alistair Harrison, was the epitome of Ivy League entitlement. Tall, impeccably dressed in bespoke suits that probably cost more than Maya's monthly rent, he moved through the Institute with an air of unshakable authority. His office, a sun-drenched corner suite overlooking Central Park, was a world away from Maya's cramped windowless lab. Harrison's interactions with Maya were a masterclass in polite condescension. He'd call her kiddo in meetings, listen to her painstakingly prepared presentations with a detached, almost bored air, and then offer feedback like, "A valiant effort, Maya, but perhaps a tad idealistic for our current funding realities." Or worse, he'd simply ignore her contributions, turning to his favored protege, Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was a piranha in a lab coat. Sharp, ambitious, and utterly ruthless, she had an uncanny ability to sniff out institutional power dynamics and align herself accordingly. She treated Maya with a veneer of professional courtesy that barely concealed a simmering resentment, perhaps even jealousy. Maya had once overheard Evelyn in the staff lounge, remarking to another colleague, "It's amazing what a little diversity quota can do for one's career, isn't it?" The comment, delivered with a saccharine smile, had stung more than any overt insult. Evelyn was a queen of microaggressions, forgetting to add Maya to crucial meeting invites, accidentally using up the last of a shared reagent Maya desperately needed, or subtly taking credit for Maya's minor insights during team briefings. The only sliver of warmth in the unit came from Dr. Ben Carter. Ben was a gifted biochemist, a lanky, perpetually disheveled man with kind eyes and a nervous habit of pushing his glasses up his nose. He recognized Maya's talent and would sometimes offer quiet words of encouragement or slip her a research paper he thought she'd find interesting. Once, after Harrison had particularly eviscerated one of Maya's proposals in a team meeting, Ben had caught her eye and given a barely perceptible shake of his head, a silent acknowledgement of the injustice. But Ben was a man who valued peace above all else. He wouldn't openly challenge Harrison or Evelyn. He was a bystander, albeit a sympathetic one. Maya's lab, officially designated Lab 3C, was tucked away at the far end of a dimly lit corridor, a place easily forgotten. It was small, a little shabby, with aging equipment that occasionally sputtered in protest. But to Maya, it was a haven, her creative crucible. Here, amidst the comforting hum of the ultracentrifuge and the precise click of pipettes, she could shut out the noise and focus. She dubbed her ROND research Project Nightingale, a name that encapsulated her hope of bringing healing and relief. She'd even taped a small faded picture of Florence Nightingale to the side of her computer monitor, a private source of inspiration. For 18 long, arduous months, Project Nightingale consumed Maya. She lived and breathed it. Her social life dwindled to occasional guilt-ridden phone calls with her grandmother. Her diet consisted mainly of lukewarm coffee, vending machine snacks, and the occasional protein bar she'd forget to eat. The city's vibrant nightlife was a distant echo, replaced by the solitary glow of her lab lights burning late into the night. She was chasing a ghost, a radical hypothesis that flew in the face of conventional ROND wisdom. Most researchers focused on amyloid plaques and tau tangles, the established hallmarks of neurodegeneration. Maya, however, had unearthed obscure, decade-old research papers from a defunct Japanese lab, hinting at a dysfunction in a specific mitochondrial enzyme pathway, a pathway most believed was merely a secondary consequence of the disease, not a primary driver. Her approach was to design a molecule that could not only protect but potentially restore function to this pathway. The path was paved with failures. Compounds that looked promising on paper proved inert in cell cultures that inexplicably died overnight. Data sets that stubbornly refused to yield any meaningful patterns. There were days when the weight of futility felt crushing. She'd stare at the endless rows of petri dishes, each one a tiny monument to a dead end, and the urge to just walk away to find an easier path would be almost overwhelming. She saw the pitying glances from other researchers, heard the whispers. Washington's still chasing that mitochondrial unicorn. Harrison, during one particularly brutal annual review, had suggested she consider a lateral move to a less speculative project. "We value tenacity, Maya," he'd said, his voice smooth as silk, "but not to the point of unproductive obsession." It was during one such low point, staring blankly at a rain-lashed window, that her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "Truth has a way of making itself known, child. You just gotta be patient enough to listen, and brave enough to see it." That night, instead of going home, Maya returned to her lab, a fresh wave of determination washing over her. She decided to re-examine a series of experiments she'd abandoned 6 months earlier. She'd been testing a batch of synthesized compounds, looking for a very specific type of neuroprotective effect, and when it hadn't materialized, she'd logged the results as negative and moved on. But a tiny, almost imperceptible blip in the data from one particular compound, designated S47, had always bothered her, an outlier. An anomaly. With renewed focus, she pulled up the archived data for S47. The lab was eerily silent, the usual hum of the Institute muted. Only the rhythmic tick-tock of an old wall clock and the gentle whir of her computer broke the stillness. Hours melted away. She applied a new series of algorithmic filters she'd been developing in her spare moments. Complex mathematical models designed to detect subtle patterns in vast datasets. And then, it happened. Not a shout, but a whisper. The screen before her flickered, then resolved into a graph that made her breath catch in her throat. S47 wasn't just mildly neuroprotective in the way she'd initially hoped. When analyzed through this new algorithmic lens, the data suggested something far more profound. It appeared to be actively reversing early-stage ROND-induced damage in the neuronal cell lines, not just halting the decay, but promoting repair. Her heart leaped, then began to pound like a drum against her ribs. Disbelief warred with a dizzying, exhilarating hope. "No way," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It can't be." She immediately began the painstaking process of replicating the experiment from scratch, her hands trembling so much she fumbled with the pipette. She meticulously prepared fresh cell cultures, synthesized a new batch of S47, triple-checking every measurement, every step. The next 72 hours were a fever dream of intense concentration. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. Ben Carter found her asleep at her bench one morning, her head resting on a stack of research papers. He'd gently draped his own lab coat over her shoulders and left a fresh cup of coffee and a granola bar. When she awoke, disoriented, she saw his note. "Keep going, Maya. You look like you're onto something big." And she was. On a crisp Friday evening, as the rest of the Hudson Institute emptied out, Maya peered through the eyepiece of her high-powered confocal microscope. The images were undeniable. The ROND-afflicted neurons treated with S47 were showing clear signs of dendritic regrowth, of restored mitochondrial function. The untreated control cells, in stark contrast, were a wasteland of decay. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, involuntary sound that was equal parts exhaustion, elation, and disbelief. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the vibrant, life-affirming images on the monitor. She'd done it. She, Maya Washington, the underestimated, often invisible scientist from Queens, had potentially found a key to unlocking one of medicine's most intractable puzzles. With shaking hands, she saved the data, meticulously labeling every file, backing it up to multiple encrypted drives. She would call the compound Amani 7. Amani, the Swahili word for wishes, aspirations, peace, a tribute to her heritage, to her grandmother's unwavering faith, and to the desperate hope of every ROND patient. The 7 was for the 7 years of relentless, often thankless toil. Her undergraduate honors thesis, her PhD research, her postdoc, all leading to this singular, breathtaking moment. A profound, bone-deep satisfaction settled over her, a warmth that chased away the lingering chill of self-doubt. This was more than a scientific breakthrough. It was a personal triumph, a testament to her resilience. She thought of every young girl of color with a passion for STEM, facing down a barrage of spoken and unspoken messages that they didn't belong. But as the adrenaline high began to ebb, a familiar cold dread crept back in. This discovery wasn't just big, it was colossal. It was Nobel Prize territory. And she knew, with a sickening certainty, that the Dr. Alistair Harrisons and Evelyn Reeds of the world would not stand idly by and watch her claim it. The quiet battle of slights and microaggressions was about to escalate into open warfare. Her grandmother's other oft-repeated saying came to mind. When you shine a bright light, child, it attracts the moths, but it also shows up the snakes. She double-locked her lab, the metallic click of the deadbolt echoing ominously in the deserted corridor. Stepping out into the crisp night air, Maya looked up at the vast, indifferent expanse of the New York sky, a tapestry of a million distant, glittering stars. She had just ignited one of her own, a beacon of hope against a devastating disease. The monumental task ahead was ensuring the world would be allowed to see its light. The fight for Amani 7 and for her own voice had just begun. The euphoria of discovery, as potent and intoxicating as it had been, began to evaporate like morning mist under the harsh fluorescent lights of the Hudson Institute. In its place settled a gnawing anxiety, a premonition of the battle to come. Maya knew she couldn't sit on Amani 7. It was too important. Every day wasted was a day ROND patients didn't have. With a deep breath that did little to calm the frantic hummingbird wings in her chest, she meticulously prepared her presentation. She compiled her data, her graphs, her electron microscopy images, an irrefutable chronicle of her 18-month odyssey. She requested a meeting with Dr. Harrison, her email carefully worded to convey urgency and significance without revealing the full, earth-shattering scope of her findings. Harrison, ever the master of passive delay, scheduled her for a brief chat 3 days later, slotting her in between a budget review and a luncheon with potential donors. When the moment arrived, Maya walked into Harrison's opulent office feeling like a gladiator entering the arena. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, making the room feel both grand and suffocating. Evelyn Reed was already there, perched on a leather Eames chair, a thin, predatory smile playing on her lips. "Maya, good for you to join us," Harrison said, gesturing vaguely towards a less comfortable guest chair. He didn't rise. Maya launched into her presentation, her voice, initially a little shaky, but gaining confidence as she laid out the science. She spoke of the mitochondrial enzyme pathway, her novel compound S47, Amani 7, and the astonishing results in the cell cultures. She showed the images of neuronal regeneration, the graphs depicting a dramatic reversal of ROND markers. For a moment, a flicker of genuine surprise, perhaps even awe, crossed Harrison's face. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, dissecting every slide. When Maya finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Harrison steepled his fingers, his gaze unreadable. "Remarkable, Maya," he finally said, his tone carefully neutral. "Quite ambitious work." Evelyn, however, was less guarded. "The cellular regeneration is intriguing," she conceded, her voice laced with skepticism. "But these are in vitro results, Maya. A long way from a viable therapy. And this S47 compound, the synthesis is complex. Are you certain there are no confounding variables? No off-target effects we're missing?" She wasn't questioning the data itself, not yet. She was chipping away at Maya's ownership, her sole claim to its interpretation. Harrison nodded slowly. "Evelyn raises valid points. This needs rigorous, independent validation, extensive further testing." "Of course," he added, a magnanimous smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The Institute will provide all necessary resources. I'll assign Evelyn to work closely with you on this. We'll form a dedicated sub-team, under my direct oversight, naturally, to fast-track this." Maya felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Dr. Harrison," she began, trying to keep her voice steady, I appreciate the support, but I'm confident in my data. I've already replicated the results multiple times. Of course you are, kiddo, Harrison interrupted, his tone indulgent. And your initial legwork has been commendable. But discoveries of this potential magnitude require a broader, more experienced team to carry them forward. We can't afford any missteps. He was already reframing it. Her initial legwork, their team, the sub-team was formed, and Evelyn Reed became Maya's shadow. She requisitioned copies of all of Maya's lab notebooks, demanded access to her raw data files, and insisted on observing every step of the Amani 7 synthesis. Maya felt like a prisoner in her own lab, her every move scrutinized. Evelyn would ask endless, pedantic questions, often rerunning experiments Maya had already meticulously completed, finding minuscule, insignificant variations she'd then report to Harrison as areas of concern requiring further clarification. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, a systematic erosion of Maya's authority and control over her own discovery. Ben Carter, observing the unfolding drama from the periphery, caught Maya alone in the break room one afternoon. He looked more rumpled and anxious than usual. "Maya," he said, his voice low, "be careful. Really careful. Harrison, he has a history. Promising research from junior scientists has a way of becoming his promising research. He calls it mentorship, but some of us call it appropriation." "What can I do, Ben?" Maya asked, her voice tight with frustration. "He's my superior. Evelyn is documenting everything." Ben fidgeted with his glasses. "Secure your original data. Keep meticulous, dated records of everything. Absolutely everything. Maybe think about reaching out to someone outside the Institute if things get really bad. An old mentor, perhaps? Someone standing." He looked around nervously, as if afraid of being overheard. "I didn't say that, okay?" he added quickly, before scurrying away. Maya took Ben's advice to heart. She started watermarking her digital files with invisible timestamps. She kept a secret parallel set of notes at home, detailing every interaction, every request from Evelyn and Harrison. She even subtly altered a non-critical step in the Amani 7 synthesis protocol she shared, a tiny variation that wouldn't affect the outcome but would serve as a unique fingerprint if they tried to replicate it without her direct involvement. This small act of defiance gave her a sliver of control, but the stress was relentless. Sleep offered little respite. Her nights were plagued by anxious dreams of her research being stolen, her name erased. The first major blow came a few weeks later. Harrison called an impromptu all-hands meeting for the neurodegenerative unit. "Just a quick update," he announced, "on some very exciting preliminary findings that are emerging from our ROND program." Maya sat in the small seminar room, her heart thumping. She expected, or at least hoped, that Harrison would acknowledge her work, perhaps even ask her to co-present. Instead, Harrison stood at the podium, Evelyn by his side like a loyal lieutenant, and proceeded to outline the core findings of Amani 7. He used slightly different terminology, presented some of her slides, rebranded with the Hudson Institute logo and his name prominently featured, and spoke of our team's innovative approach and a promising new compound currently designated Hybro Alpha that was showing unprecedented neuroregenerative potential. He mentioned Maya once, almost as an afterthought, with valuable early-stage cell culture work contributed by Dr. Washington. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. Valuable early-stage cell culture work? It was her hypothesis, her compound, her discovery from start to finish. She looked around the room. Most of her colleagues were nodding, impressed. A few shot her quick, pitying glances before looking away. Ben Carter stared fixedly at his shoes. Evelyn, meanwhile, basked in the reflected glory, interjecting with technical details that made it sound as if she'd been intimately involved from day one. Maya wanted to scream, to stand up and denounce them, but a paralyzing wave of shock and anger rooted her to her seat. How could they be so blatant, so audacious? After the meeting, she confronted Harrison outside his office. "Dr. Harrison, that was my research you presented. Amani 7, not Hybro Alpha." Harrison regarded her with a cool, appraising look. "Maya, let's not get territorial. Science is a collaborative effort. Your initial findings were a spark, yes, but it takes a team and significant institutional resources, my funding, to fan that spark into a flame. You're part of that team. Be proud of your contribution." He patted her shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a brand than a reassurance, and swept into his office, leaving her standing there, trembling with a mixture of rage and despair. That night, Maya didn't go home. She sat in her small, shadowed lab, the image of Harrison and Evelyn at the podium burning in her mind. Ben's words echoed, "Reach out to someone outside." Her thoughts turned to Professor Anirban Chatterjee, her PhD advisor at Stanford. Professor Chatterjee was a titan in the field of molecular biology, a man of unimpeachable integrity and a fierce advocate for young scientists. He had always believed in her, encouraged her unconventional thinking. With a surge of desperate resolve, Maya began to type. She poured out the whole story to Professor Chatterjee, her initial hypothesis, the lonely months of research, the breakthrough with Amani 7, Harrison and Evelyn's systematic takeover, the humiliating internal seminar. She attached her original, dated research proposal, her complete lab notebooks, scanned and encrypted, her raw data, the images, everything. She even included a detailed timeline of events. It was a digital cry for help, a Hail Mary pass into the academic ether. She hit send just as the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the Manhattan skyline. A week passed, a week of suffocating tension. Evelyn's presence in her lab became even more overbearing. Harrison was distant, almost dismissive when she tried to discuss the next steps for Hibro Alpha. Maya felt like she was drowning. Then the summons came. Harrison's assistant called, her voice clipped and formal. "Dr. Harrison would like to see you in his office, immediately." Maya's stomach twisted into a knot. This was it. She found Harrison and Evelyn waiting for her. Harrison was holding a glossy printout, the abstract submission page for the prestigious upcoming Global Neuroscience Summit in Geneva. "Good news, Maya," Harrison said, his smile tight. "Our paper on Hibro Alpha has been accepted for a keynote presentation at the Geneva Summit, a major coup for the Hudson Institute, and of course, for the team." He slid another paper across his polished mahogany desk. It was a draft of the manuscript they were preparing for submission to Cellular Neuroscience Today, one of the top journals in the field. Maya scanned the author list. Harrison was the first author. Evelyn was second. Then came two other senior researchers from Harrison's inner circle. Her name, Maya Washington, was listed fifth, just before a research technician who primarily washed glassware. "We felt your contribution, while foundational, was more technical in nature," Evelyn chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But a fifth authorship on a paper like this, in a journal like Cell, is still very good for a junior researcher's CV." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "We're being generous, Maya, acknowledging your early efforts. I expect your full cooperation in preparing the final data sets for both the publication and the Geneva presentation. No more recalcitrance. Your future at this institute, and indeed in this field, could very much depend on your attitude moving forward." The threat, though veiled, was unmistakable. Cooperate and be a footnote, or resist and be crushed. Maya stared at the papers, at their smiling, triumphant faces. The weight of their betrayal, the sheer audacity of their theft, pressed down on her, stealing her breath. This was no longer just about Amani 7. This was about her very identity as a scientist, her integrity, her voice. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her. They had the power, the connections, the institutional backing. She was just one person. But then she thought of her grandmother. "Truth has a way of making itself known, child." And she thought of Professor Chatterjee. Had he even received her email? Was there any hope at all? She looked up at Harrison, her eyes, though filled with unshed tears, holding a spark of defiance he clearly didn't expect. "Dr. Harrison," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, "I believe there's been a grave misunderstanding about the origins and ownership of this research." Harrison's smile vanished. "Misunderstanding, Dr. Washington? I assure you there is no misunderstanding on my part." The battle lines were drawn, and Maya, though outmaneuvered and seemingly cornered, was not yet ready to surrender. The shadow of ambition had fallen, but her own light, however small, still flickered. The days crawled by with agonizing slowness, each one a fresh torment for Maya. The air in the Hudson Institute was thick with a smug, anticipatory buzz amongst Harrison's loyalists, a stark contrast to the knot of ice in Maya's own stomach. She'd done all she could, sending her digital SOS to Professor Chatterjee, her academic lifeline. Now, all that was left was the waiting, a passive, helpless state that chafed against her very nature. She continued her work, a ghost in her own lab, while Harrison and Evelyn finalized their presentation for the Global Neuroscience Summit in Geneva, meticulously polishing the data she had bled for. The hypocrisy was a bitter pill she was forced to swallow daily. Evelyn, in particular, seemed to take a perverse pleasure in her supervisory role. "Maya, could you just rerun the Western blots for the tau phosphorylation assay? Dr. Harrison wants a cleaner image for slide 17, she'd demand, knowing full well Maya's original images were impeccable. It was less about the science and more about reinforcing the hierarchy, about grinding Maya down. Ben Carter, bless his hesitant soul, tried to run interference where he could. He'd accidentally spill coffee on a crucial printout Evelyn needed, forcing a delay or misplace a key reagent, buying Maya precious moments of respite. He'd offer her sympathetic glances over the top of his perpetually smudged glasses, small gestures that meant the world. The night before Harrison and Evelyn were due to fly to Geneva, Maya found a small, anonymously placed energy bar and a scribbled note on her bench. "Don't let them win. Truth finds a way. A friend." She knew it was Ben. It was a tiny act of rebellion, but it fanned the dying embers of her hope. Then, the morning of Harrison's keynote, Maya's personal cell phone, clutched in her sweaty palm as she sat in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, vibrated. An international number. Switzerland. "Dr. Washington?" The voice was calm, cultured, instantly recognizable. Professor Anirban Chatterjee. Maya's breath hitched. "Professor? Oh, thank God. Did you get my email?" "Indeed I did, Maya." His voice was warm, but underscored with a distinct chill when he spoke of the situation. "I've been in Geneva for 2 days already, making some inquiries. What Dr. Harrison is attempting is not just unethical, it's a profound betrayal of the scientific ethos. I've reviewed your documentation, it's irrefutable." Tears pricked Maya's eyes. "I didn't know what else to do." "You did the right thing, child," he said gently. "Now I have arranged something. Harrison is scheduled to speak at 2 p.m. Geneva time. I have managed to secure a 5-minute special address slot immediately following his presentation. The organizers are intrigued, though unaware of the specifics. I need you to be watching the live stream. And Maya," he paused, "be ready. This will be public." The hours leading up to the keynote were a vortex of anxiety and adrenaline. Maya sat with her grandmother, Luella, in their small living room, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating their tense faces. Luella held Maya's hand, her grip surprisingly strong, her quiet prayers a comforting hum in the background. Finally, Harrison appeared on the live stream, striding onto the vast stage in Geneva, the picture of academic achievement. Evelyn sat in the front row, beaming like a proud parent. He launched into his presentation, Hebrew Alpha, a paradigm shift in neurodegenerative therapeutics. Maya watched, a cold fury building as her slides, her data, her Amani 7 were paraded before the world under false colors. He spoke of our team's tireless efforts, of the Hudson Institute's commitment to innovation. He even had the gall to include a generic stock photo of a diverse research team, subtly implying inclusivity while actively erasing a Black woman's pivotal contribution. When Harrison finished to polite applause, he was about to field questions when the session moderator, a renowned Swiss neurologist named Dr. Albers, stepped forward. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison, for that stimulating presentation. Before we open the floor, we have a brief, unscheduled special address from a highly distinguished colleague, Professor Anirban Chatterjee from Stanford University, who wishes to comment on a matter of significant scientific importance." A ripple of surprise went through the auditorium. Chatterjee was a giant in the field. His unexpected appearance signaled something major. On the screen, Maya saw Harrison's confident smirk falter, replaced by a flicker of apprehension. Evelyn looked momentarily confused, then visibly uneasy. Professor Chatterjee walked to the podium, exuding an aura of unimpeachable integrity. He adjusted the microphone, his gaze sweeping over the hundreds of assembled scientists. "Thank you, Dr. Albers, and esteemed colleagues," he began, his voice clear and resonant. "I have listened with great interest to Dr. Harrison's presentation concerning the compound he has termed hybro alpha. The potential therapeutic efficacy is, without doubt, remarkable." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "However," he continued, his tone shifting, becoming sharper, "it is with a heavy heart, but a clear conscience that I must address a grave issue of scientific provenance and ethical conduct concerning this very discovery." The silence in the hall was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Harrison was now visibly pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the lectern. Evelyn looked like she'd seen a ghost. "The foundational research," Professor Chatterjee declared, his voice ringing with authority, "the innovative hypothesis targeting the mitochondrial enzyme pathway, the painstaking synthesis of the novel compound in question, and the crucial initial validation of its neuroregenerative properties were not, as implied, the primary work of Dr. Harrison's team. They were, in fact, the singular brilliant achievement of a young scientist at the Hudson Institute, Dr. Maya Washington." Gasps echoed through the auditorium. On the live stream, the camera panned briefly, catching shocked faces, furiously scribbling reporters. Maya felt Luella squeeze her hand, tears now streaming down her own face, tears of vindication. "Dr. Washington," Chatterjee continued, "entrusted me weeks ago with her complete, meticulously dated research records, her original hypothesis, lab notebooks, raw analytical data, synthesis protocols, and a comprehensive timeline of events. This documentation unequivocally establishes her as the originator of this breakthrough compound, which she aptly named Amani 7. He then, with surgical precision, projected a series of slides. The first showed Maya's original dated research proposal. The next, key pages from her digitized lab notebooks, clearly watermarked with early dates. Then a side-by-side comparison of Maya's electron microscopy images of Amani 7 treated cells next to the images Harrison had just presented as hybro alpha. They were identical, save for Harrison's relabeling. He even pointed out subtle, unique characteristics in the data that Maya had deliberately embedded in her original files, digital fingerprints that Harrison's team had unwittingly copied. "It has become painfully clear," Professor Chatterjee stated, his voice resonating with moral outrage, "that Dr. Washington's pioneering work was systematically appropriated, her name and contribution deliberately minimized, in a flagrant breach of scientific ethics. This is not collaboration, this is intellectual theft, and it is an affront to every honest researcher in this room." Harrison looked like he might collapse. Evelyn had buried her face in her hands. The auditorium was in an uproar. "Dr. Maya Washington," Chatterjee concluded, his voice ringing with conviction, "is not merely a footnote. She is the innovator. She is the discoverer of Amani 7. And it is she who deserves the full, unadulterated credit and recognition for this monumental achievement. I trust the summit organizers, the Hudson Institute, and the wider scientific community will take immediate and appropriate action." The session moderator, Dr. Albers, looking grim, immediately thanked Professor Chatterjee and announced the Q&A, with Harrison was suspended pending a review. The live stream cut out, but the shockwaves were already circling the globe. Geneva Gate, the science blogs were calling it within the hour. Back in Brooklyn, Maya was sobbing, a torrent of relief, anger, and overwhelming gratitude washing over her. Luella held her, rocking her gently. "I told you, child," she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. "Truth always got its own way of marching into the light." The fallout for Harrison and Evelyn was swift and brutal. The Hudson Institute, facing a PR nightmare of epic proportions and irrefutable evidence, launched an immediate and this time genuinely independent investigation. Within a week, both Harrison and Evelyn were suspended indefinitely, their careers in ruins, their names synonymous with scientific fraud. The highbrow alpha manuscript was unceremoniously retracted. The Institute, desperate for damage control, approached Maya. The interim director, a respected older scientist named Dr. Chen, personally apologized for the egregious lapse in oversight and ethics. Then, he made her an offer, her own fully funded lab, a dedicated team, and complete autonomy to lead the continued development and clinical trials of Amani 7. The Hudson Institute owes you a profound debt, Dr. Washington, Dr. Chen had said, and we hope to begin repaying it by giving you the resources and respect you have unequivocally earned. A few months later, Maya stood at a different podium, not as an accuser, but as the celebrated keynote speaker at a special conference on innovations in neurodegenerative disease, hosted by the National Institutes of Health. Her presentation, Amani 7, From Bench to Breakthrough, was met with a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. In the audience, she saw Professor Chatterjee beaming with pride. Ben Carter was there too, no longer looking rumpled and anxious, but confident and proud to be introduced as a future senior member of Maya's new Amani 7 research team. Letters poured in from families of ROND patients expressing their profound gratitude and hope, from young women of color in STEM fields who saw her as an icon, from fellow scientists applauding her courage. The fight had been brutal, scarring even, but it had forged her. She was no longer just a brilliant scientist. She was a symbol of resilience, of integrity triumphant. Maya Washington, once the overlooked star, now shone with an undeniable brilliance. Her journey from the quiet hum of her small queen's microscope to the global stage was a testament to the enduring power of passion, perseverance, and the unwavering conviction that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will ultimately prevail. She knew there would be other challenges, other battles, but she faced the future with a newfound strength, ready to not only advance science, but also to champion the ethical, inclusive environment where all brilliant minds, regardless of their origin, could truly flourish. Amani 7 was more than a cure. It was a promise. And Maya Washington was just getting started.